Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-priced commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Riveter gang of thugs, the Beamtown Bullies. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I continue to work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see who won last week's poll and what commanders from Streets of New Capenna you'll be voting for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. The Beamtown Bullies are a 4/4 Ogre Devil Warrior with Vigilance and Haste that costs 1, a black, a red, and a green with the following ability. Tap, target opponent whose turn it is puts target non-legendary creature from your graveyard onto the battlefield under their control. It gains haste and goad it. At the beginning of the next end step, exile it. Looking at their core stats, the Beamtown Bullies possess a mid-size CMC, an average stat block for their cost alongside 2 decent keywords that allow them to attack and still be able to use their tap ability as soon as they come down, and a rather unique ability that allows us to reanimate our creatures on our opponent's side of the board at no cost. Looking deeper into this ability, at first it would seem counterintuitive to give our opponent's creatures since we would rather reanimate our creatures on our side of the field instead. However, because these creatures are entering the battlefield under our opponent's control and it costs us no mana to do this, it opens up 2 interesting lines of play for us to abuse. The first would be giving our opponent's creatures with absolutely terrible downsides that no one in their right mind would ever run, either to harm our opponents with their atrocious effects, or to help ourselves instead if the creature's downside instead benefits the rest of the table. And since creatures with downsides usually have decent sized bodies to compensate, compelling them to swing at someone else other than ourselves is a win-win for us, as they'll either get in for extra damage or take out some blockers, either of which we're fine with. Then in the second line of play, we can instead focus on giving our opponents enormous creatures with powerful attack triggers that affect the defending player. Since our opponents won't be able to swing at us with the gifted creature, it will be effectively free additional damage and removal against our other opponents. And should the game go long enough, we can simply hardcast these juggernauts or cheat them into play instead via other effects to use them against our opponents ourselves. And, as a final note on this ability, it's important to realize that the creatures we give to our opponents are not exiled until end of turn, meaning if they happen to be destroyed before then, they'll simply go right back into our graveyard so we can use them again, which is why instant speed removal will be absolutely vital in order to make maximum use out of our commander's ability, which we won't only use to disrupt our opponent's boards as we usually do, but also keep getting our gifted creatures back to our grave to be re-gifted over and over again. So, as we can see, the line of play these bullies want to take is to give our opponents creatures that either hurt them or do our dirty work for us, which is why this build will be aiming to do just that. Running lots of creatures with terrible effects we have no intention of playing ourselves but instead gifting to our opponents so they can suffer instead. Plenty of ways to get those creatures from our deck or hand into the bin so they can be gifted by our commander as soon as possible. An arsenal of instant speed removal to ensure that we can get our creatures back into our graveyard instead of exiling them to use them again. And a handful of ways to untap our commander and keep them alive, both to get extra uses out of their ability and to make sure they live through the removal that will surely be coming their way once our opponents get sick of their bullying. Now, let's turn these bullies loose against our opponents. After all, this trio of hardened thugs would like nothing better than to show these pampered planeswalkers just how things get done on New Capenna. And seeing as they just got off the clock, they still happen to have their tools that they're more than willing to introduce to our opponents, repeatedly, preferably to their faces. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Skipping straight to the CMC2 slot, we start off with Seeker of Skybreak, a 2/1 that we can tap to untap another target creature, making it a cheap body that allows us to get repeated extra uses out of our commander throughout the course of the game to give our opponents even more detrimental creatures. Then we close out this slot with Sakura Tribelder, a 1/1 that we can sack to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, cheaply ramping us and fixing our mana base, which is much appreciated in this 3-color build. Moving on to the CMC3 slot, the first of its 2 members is Ebonblade Reaper, a 1/1 with Morph for 3 and double black that, when it attacks, has its controller lose half their life and, if it deals combat damage to a player, has that player do the same, giving us a very nasty body to give to our opponents to bifurcate their life totals and then either being blocked and going back to our grave to be used again, or not be blocked and do the same to its target, either of which are fine by us. The second and last member of this lot is then Royal Assassin, a 1/1 that we can tap to destroy target tapped creature, making it the first of our repeatable creature removal on bodies that we can use to destroy our own gifted creatures after they swing in to get them back, or just as repeatable removal for our opponent's creatures if needed. Continuing on to the CMC4 slot, we'll start off with some backbreaking ETB effects in the form of Eater of Days and Inverter of Truth. Eater of Days is a 9/8 flying trampler that, when it ETBs, has its controller skip their next 2 turns, making it a devastating creature to hand to an opponent that, while not an immediate game over, is still a massive tempo loss that very few can recover from, while also being a massive beatstick with relevant keywords to get that extra damage in on our behalf. Inverter of Truth is a 6/6 with the Void and Flying that, when it ETBs, has its controller exile their entire deck face down and then shuffle their graveyard into their deck, giving us another backbreaking effect that, if played early enough, can give an opponent only a few turns before they deck themselves, or one more turn if we give it to them again, and also serving as a silver bullet against graveyard-focused builds to spin all their resources back into their deck while also being a big evasive beatstick on its own. Hunted Wumpus and Enslaved Horror then join our ranks as creatures that are less bad for their summoner and much better for the rest of the table. The former being a 6/6 that, when it ETBs, lets all other players other than its controller put a creature from their hand into play for free, while the latter is a 4/4 with an ETB that lets each other player reanimate a creature from their graveyard instead, allowing us to cheat out our massive top ends that will undoubtedly outclass anything our opponents are able to get into play. Avaricious Dragon then closes out our bad creatures in this slot, being a 4/4 flyer that, on its controller's upkeep, has them draw an extra card, and on their controller's end phase has them discard their entire hand, easily enabling us to strip our opponent's hands away by merely existing, and being one of the few bad cards that we're willing to hardcast ourselves if we have too many bricks in hand that we need to rid ourselves of, and see if the draw 2 on future turns is better for us. Then moving away from bad creatures and onto how to get them into our bin, Auric Loremage and Volentumor join our ranks as solid forms of graveyard setup, the former being a 3/3 that we can tap to put a card from our deck into our grave, getting a +1/+1 counter if that card is an instant or sorcery, and the latter being a 2/2 with Death Touch that also sends a card from our deck to our graveyard but only on ETB, making them both solid graveyard tutors to set up our grave with the nastiest creatures we have at our disposal for our commander to gift at will. And lastly, the legend Sereth the Viper's Fang closes out this slot, who's a 3/4 who gives all our other untapped creatures hexproof and all our other tapped creatures Death Touch instead, as well as letting us pay 1 in tapper to untap target creature or land we control, giving our commander and other top end solid protection from targeted removal, as well as another way to untap the bullies to allow them to use their effect more than once per rotation. Now entering the CMC 5 slot, we're back to the bad creatures and what's likely the vilest creature in this build, Leveler, a 10/10 that, when it ETBs, exiles its owner's library, effectively giving its unfortunate victim one more turn before they deck out, and can be changed surprisingly easy with enough instant speed removal and ways to untap our commander, enabling us to eliminate 2 or even all 3 of our opponents in a single rotation, making it the definite game ender in this build. Less mean but still pretty bad, Caldera Hellion and Ox of Agonis join us as some mono-red entrants, the former being a 3/3 with Devour 1 that, when it ETBs, deals 3 damage to all other creatures, and the latter being a 4/2 that has its controller discard their hand and draw 3, as well as having an escape cost of double red and exiling 8 cards, escaping with a +1/+1 counter, making them both solid sources of disruption to help clear the board and strip our opponent's hands, with the latter being another card we can consider casting or escaping ourselves to help reload our hands in a pinch. Corpse Connoisseur and Gravebreaker Lamia then get slotted in as additional graveyard setup sources, the first being a 3/3 with Unearth for a 3 and a black that lets us put any creature from our deck into our grave when it ETBs, and the second being a 4/4 lifelinker that does the same but for any card instead, while also making our cards in our graveyard 1 cheaper to cast, again giving our build even more ways to set up our bin so our commander can put it to use. Then wrapping up this slot, we have the legend Karazakar the Eye Tyrant, a 5/5 that, whenever it attacks, lets us tap down a creature the defending player controls and goads it, and whenever an opponent attacks 1 or more players other than us, has both us and that player draw a card and lose a life, primarily serving as a way to get extra cards as we force our gifted creatures to attack, but still being a good source of disruption with its goad and decent size bulk. Reaching the CMC 6 slot, we have the last of our bad creatures with Crater Hellion and Morkrut Necropod. Crater Hellion is a 6/6 with Echo for 4 and double red that deals 4 damage to all other creatures when it ETBs, similar to Caldera Hellion before it, but serving as a bigger board wipe on an even bigger body, though we will need to be careful with this one as it can destroy our commander with its effect if we can't protect them. Morkrut Necropod is a 7/7 with Menace that, whenever it attacks, has its controller sack another creature or land, making it a decent combination of bulk and edict removal to help pick apart our opponent's boards while getting in for solid damage. Then the second half of this slot brings us some more beneficial creatures in the form of Flayer of the Hatebound and Viscera the Dreadful. Flayer of the Hatebound is a 4/2 with Undying that, whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield from our graveyard, has that creature deal damage equal to its power to any target, tacking on some serious damage-based removal or burn to every huge body we gift our opponents to help us close out games even faster. Viscera the Dreadful is a 5/5 flyer that we can tap to destroy target creature and prevent it from regenerating, giving us another repeatable way to destroy our own or our opponent's creatures, this time on a big evasive body that can crack in for damage itself. Proceeding to the CMC 7 slot, the first of two members is Dragon Mage, a 5/5 flyer that, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, has each player discard their hand and draw 7 cards. Its on-damage wheel being quite disruptive for those not expecting it and beneficial for us to reload our hands while setting up our graveyard. Bane of Balaged then closes out this slot, a 7/5 that, whenever it attacks, has the defending player exile 2 permanents they control. Its combination of big stats and souped up Annihilator making it both a great creature to give our opponents early, so they can pick apart each other's boards with it, as well as being a solid top end for us instead once we get there. Now entering the CMC 8 slot, our first entrant is the heavy-hitting Ulamog's Crusher, an 8/8 with Annihilator 2 that must attack each turn if able, giving us another huge beat stick with devastating on-attack trigger to both give to our opponents early or use against them ourselves later. Then our second and last entrant in this slot is Avatar of Woe, a 6/5 with Fear that costs 6 less to cast if there are 10 plus creatures in all graveyards, and we can tap to destroy target creature, preventing that creature from regenerating, making it the final and biggest on-demand creature destruction we're running, which we can often cast for double black due to the sheer amount of graveyard setup and removal we have in this build, and its built-in evasion and big stat block making it a decent attacker as well. Nearly at the end now, the CMC 9 slot brings us its single entrant with Artisan of Kozilek, a 10/9 with Annihilator 2 that, if cast from hand, lets us return another creature from our graveyard back onto the battlefield, joining its other Eldrazi brethren as a huge beat stick to give to our opponents early so they can tear each other apart with it, but also being very good if we hardcast it to give us that free reanimate, especially if we have other Eldrazi in the bin. And finally, skipping to the CMC 11 slot, we have our final creature entrant with Pathraiser of Ulamog, a 9/9 with Annihilator 3 that can only be blocked by 3 or more creatures. It's sack 3 on attack and Super Menace, making it a devastating creature to crack in for damage and pick apart boards, regardless if either us or our opponents are the ones controlling it. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Skipping right to the CMC 2 slot, we start off with some removal spells with Terminate and Infernal Grasp, both of which destroy target creature, the former preventing it from regenerating and the latter costing 2 life to cast, making them cheap and effective means to either destroy our own gifted creatures to get them back into our bin before they exile themselves, or to simply destroy our opponent's creatures instead. Then we have even more removal joining us with Cast Down, Heartless Act, and Power Word Kill, which again destroy target creature, the first being limited to non-legendaries, the second being limited to creatures without counters on them, otherwise removing 3 counters instead, and the last being limited to non-angel, demon, devil, or dragons, all of which again are cheap instant speed removal that, while they do have some limitations, are still more than reliable enough for our purposes. Then closing out this slot, we have Thrill of Possibility and Cathartic Reunion, both of which let us discard cards to draw cards, the former letting us discard 1 to draw 2, and the latter letting us discard 2 to draw 3, making them both cheap and reliable means to pitch our bad creatures into our bin to enable our commander, while letting us dig deeper into our deck while doing so. Moving on to the CMC 3 slot, we're back on the removal plan with Putrefy, Hero's Downfall, and Bedevil, all of which are able to destroy target creature, the first also being able to hit artifacts, the second also being able to hit planeswalkers, and the last being able to hit artifacts and planeswalkers, providing us with flexible removal options that can hit multiple types of threats depending on the situation. And speaking of flexible, Beast Within also gets added into our instant arsenal, which can destroy target permanents and give its controller a 3/3 to replace it, giving us an all-star removal option that can deal with almost any type of threat we may encounter with only minimal downside. And as our last instant speed removal option, we have Force of Despair, which destroys all creatures that enter the battlefield that turn and, if it's not our turn, lets us exile a black card from our hand rather than pay its mana cost, enabling us to remove the creature we gift our opponents along with anything else they may have been able to summon, while also being very easy to catch someone off guard with thanks to its alternate casting cost. Electric Revelation then wraps up this slot, which lets us discard a card to draw 2 and has Flashback for 3 and a red, giving us another way to pitch our bricks to dig deeper into our deck and allowing us to do so twice per game at instant speed. Closing in on the end now, the CMC 4 slot brings us its 2 members with Big Score and Unexpected Windfall, both of which let us discard 1 to draw 2 and create 2 treasure tokens, again serving as even more ways to fill up our bin and dig for more resources, with the added benefit of ramping us to help us get to our higher mana top ends much faster. And finally, the CMC 5 slot brings us our last instant entry with Return of the Wild Speaker, which either draws cards equal to the highest power among non-humans we control, or gives all non-humans we control +3/+3 until end of turn, its draw being nice with even just our commander in play to draw 4 and gets only better once we start reaching our top ends, while its instant speed pump is nice if we need that extra bit of power to close out a game instead. That covers all our instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. The CMC1 slot brings us its single entrant with Faithless Looting, which lets us draw 2, discard 2, and has flashback for 2 and a red, giving us another dirt cheap means to fill up our bin twice per game, and the fact that it draws before the discard being nice in case we draw into bricks as well. Moving on to the CMC2 slot, the ramp sources Rampant Growth and Farseek are up next, both of which let us put a land from our deck into play tapped, the former being limited to basics and the latter to any land with a non-forest basic land type, making them great sources of land-based ramp and fixing, which is always appreciated in 3-color builds. Then we close out this slot with Unmarked Grave, which simply sends a non-legendary card from our deck into our graveyard, making it our cheapest graveyard tutor, whose limitation doesn't really affect us as our commander's unable to gift legendary creatures anyway. The CMC3 slot then brings us more ramp options with Cultivate and Kodama's Reach, both of which search our deck for 2 basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into our hand, again serving as superb land-based ramp to help speed up and fix our mana base. Painful Truths then closes out this slot, which has us draw X and lose X life, where X is equal to the number of different colors of mana we spent to cast it, usually making it a draw 3 for 3, which is a fantastic rate to help reload our hands once we start running low on cards. Nearly at the end of our sorcery entries, the CMC4 slot brings us Gerard's Orders, which searches our deck for 2 creatures, putting one into our hand and the other into our grave, adding yet another graveyard tutor to the build with the added bonus of also being a creature tutor, to help us get our payoffs, removal creatures and untappers directly into hand to help speed up our game plan. And finally, we finish up our sorceries in the CMC5 slot with Final Parting, which searches our deck for 2 cards, putting one into our hand and the other into our grave. Like Gerard's Orders, letting us set up our graveyard even further, but this time allowing us to tutor up anything we may need to hand for even more flexibility. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. The first half of the CMC1 slot brings us Font of Fertility, which we can pay 1, a green, tap it and sack it to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, adding even more cheap land-based ramp to help speed up and fix our mana base. Then the second half of this slot brings us Sinister Concoction, which lets us pay a black, mill 1, discard 1, and sack it to destroy target creature, making it another cheap removal option that also lets us set up our graveyard, which is exactly what we want more of. Then skipping to the CMC3 slot, we come to our last enchantment with Blessing of Leeches, an aura that we can cast at instant speed and lets us regenerate the enchanted creature for 0 at the cost of having us lose 1 life on our upkeep, serving as a solid way to keep our commander alive at flash speed repeatedly at no mana cost. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. Starting off in the CMC1 slot, we have its only entrant with Soul Ring, which taps for 2 colorless, which we're running despite being in green due to our high cost top ends, which this rock helps us get to much easier. Moving on to the CMC2 slot, we start off with another rock in the form of Arcane Signet, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, again helping us speed up and fix our mana base alongside our other ramp sources. Then Swiftfoot Boots and Ring of Zathra join us as a pair of protection sources, both of which are equipments that equip for 1, the former granting the equipped creature hexproof and haste, and the latter letting us regenerate the equipped creature for 2 and giving it a +1/+1 counter on our upkeep if it's black, each providing our commander with solid targeted removal and destruction protection respectively, to harden them against our opponent's removal attempts. Key to the City then closes out this slot, which lets us tap it and discard a card to make target creature unblockable, as well as giving us the option to pay 2 when it untaps to draw a card, making it a free discard outlet we can use on the creatures we gift our opponents to ensure they can get in for damage, while also letting us replace the card we pitched to do so if we have the mana to spare. Finally, reaching the CMC3 slot and our last pair of artifacts, we have Medicine Bag and Puppet Strings. Medicine Bag lets us pay 1, tap it and discard a card to regenerate target creature, again giving us another repeatable way to send our bad creatures to the bin for our commander to gift, while also providing our commander and other top ends with respectable defense against destruction. Puppet Strings lets us pay 2 and tap it to tap or untap target creature, again giving us an additional way to untap our commander to have them use their ability again, or alternatively tap down our opponent's creatures as needed. That covers all our artifacts, and with no planeswalkers to cover, let's move straight to our land base. Starting with our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Exotic Orchard, which taps for any color our opponent's lands would be able to produce, Savage Lands, which comes into play tapped and taps for any of our colors, Cinderglade and Smoldering Marsh, both of which come into play tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands, tap for 2 of our colors and have the basic land types of the mana they would produce, Foreboding Ruins and Game Trail, both of which come into play tapped unless we reveal a basic land type of the mana they would be able to produce and tap for 2 of our colors, Llanowar Wastes, which either taps for a colorless or a green or black instead if we take a damage. Mossfire Valley and Shadowblood Ridge, both of which we can pay 1 and tap to produce either a red and green or black and red respectively. Temple of Abandon and Temple of Malady, both of which come into play tapped, tap for 2 of our colors and scry 1 when they ETB. And finally, Blighted Woodland and Myriad Landscape, both of which tap for a colorless and we can tap and sack to put 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped. The former costing 3 and a green to do this, while the latter costs 2 but comes into play tapped and is limited to 2 of the same basic land. Then for utility lands, we'll be running both Cassig Wolfrun and Skarg the Rage Pits, both of which tap for a colorless and let us tap them to give target creature trample until end of turn. The former costing X a red and a green to do this, while also granting the creature +X+0 until end of turn, while the latter costs a red and a green to do this and gives the creature +1/+1 until end of turn instead, both enabling us to pump the creatures we gift our opponents to allow them to hit even harder and get through for damage, as well as doing the same for our own creatures once we get to our top ends. And finally, we're running 6 swamps, 5 mountains, and 9 forests as our basics to close out our land base. So, now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 29 creatures including the commander, 15 instants, 10 sorceries, 3 enchantments, 7 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 12 creatures with what would be considered bad effects, 11 creatures with 5/5 and up stat blocks, 19 sources of graveyard setup from our hand or deck, 5 sources of protection from targeting and removal, and 3 cards that let us untap our creatures, leaving us with a menagerie of creatures with horrible effects and or huge stat blocks, to both hurt our opponents and then force them to use them against each other, plenty of means to get those creatures into our bin to enable our commander, and a handful of ways to keep our commander alive through removal as well as get extra uses out of them by untapping them. For general deck stats, we have 12 ramp sources, 7 card draw sources, 21 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes. Our draw being lower than normal since we'll be generating most of our value from our graveyard, while our removal is off the charts since we'll be needing it to destroy our own gifted creatures before they exile themselves so we can use them again, with our ramp and wipes falling in within more normal ratios. Looking at our mana curve, we have 4 1-drops, 16 2-drops, 14 3-drops, 12 4-drops, 8 5-drops, 6 6-drops, 2 7-drops, 2 8-drops, 1 9-drop, and 1 11-drop, giving us a mid to heavyweight curve that's much faster than it appears thanks to our ability to gift our high CMC creatures to our opponents for free, aiming to drop our commander ASAP once we've dropped at least 1 bad creature into our bin to begin harassing our opponents with our malevolent gifts. This deck is currently valued at $64.96, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, Soulgorger Org, Hired Giant, and Ugin's Construct all possess bad ETB effects to further hamper our opponents with their temporary life modification, ramp for other players, and edict removal, while Phyrexian Warbeast and Lesser Gargadon can be useful if we want to focus on attacking our opponent's land bases instead. For upgrades, Buried Alive is a great means to get multiple creatures into our bin for our commander to gift away. Bronze Bombshell is a free repeatable 7 damage whenever we gift it to an opponent since it sacks itself when we do so. Phyrexian Negator forces our opponents to lose even more of their resources whenever it's blocked or takes damage of any kind. Tempting Worm and Boldwire Heavyweights let us cheat even more cards into play from our hands and deck respectively. And Hellcarver Demon is a powerful pseudo-wipe whenever it cracks in for damage that's still very effective despite it somewhat rebuilding the affected player's board after it resolves. And finally, Entomb is the cheapest graveyard tutor we can have, mana-wise anyway, to ensure that we can cheaply get any creature we want directly into our bin, though its $30 price tag ensures that it's going to be burying our wallets alongside its intended target. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you who saw and enjoyed the pre-con upgrades we've been releasing. Your feedback has been very positive and we'll be continuing to release more content like this in the future, maybe even with a few tweaks to accommodate for content outside of pre-cons. And I would also like to take a moment to thank all the channel subs for helping us crack the 4.1k milestone. The channel's growth has been spectacular thanks to all of your support, so thank you and I hope you continue to support us in the future. Looking at the results of last week's poll, it looks like Agnes the Dragon's Lash took the first place spot with nearly half the votes, so look forward to a hasty treasure-focused build featuring her next week. Moving on to this week's poll, with so little time on the clock before Commander Legends 2 is upon us, we'll need to step up our poll so that more commanders get their chance to be on them. So for this week, we'll have all 5 heads of the families on New Capenna compete against each other, with Falco Spara Pact Weaver, Jetmir Nexus of Revels, Lord Xander the Collector, Rafine Scheming Seer, and Zaitora the Incinerator all being the contenders on the polls this time around. Please cast your vote in the community tab, link in the description, and let me know in the comments who you voted for and which commanders from Streets of New Capenna you'd like to see in future polls. But before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank Sahir21 for their generous donation. Thanks for the coffee, Sahir21, and thanks for supporting the channel. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to check out the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the cut rate commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.